Nightdive Studios' release is almost always a tale of two reviews. On the one hand, you have the original game that may or may not hold up to modern scrutiny. On the other, you have Nightdive's impressive and standard-setting remaster work that often takes unplayable games and makes them functional. For more than a decade now, the bar for remaster quality has been consistently raised by the studio, and that has led to someone like me getting excited for a game called PO'd. So, what the hell is PO'd? Originally released in 1995 by developer AnyChannel for EA's ill-fated 3DO console, the game was created as a response to the proliferation of FPS titles coming out in the early 90s. As lead programmer Russell Fluhaupt said to Next Generation magazine, "We looked at games like Doom, Marathon, and Dark Forces and took what we felt were their best elements. But we wanted to get away from the tunnel-based feel of those games." Does PO'd succeed in that goal? And what of Nightdive's remaster, dubbed PO'd Definitive Edition? Those questions might sound loaded, but despite the technical hell it likely was to get this running on modern platforms, things are pretty simple here. We'll start this review by discussing the game of PO'd before delving into what Nightdive has done to modernize it a little. In summary, the remaster work is great, and if you're a fan of PO'd, this really is the definitive way to experience it. There's no real surprise there. Much like other 90s shooters, PO'd doesn't really have much of a plot. The game starts with an opening text crawl from a chef named Ox. Ox writes home to his mother about how some strange alien forces overrun the spaceship he was on and killed all of his crewmates. Being the sole survivor, Ox needs to fight his way through this bizarre alien planet to not only return home, but seek vengeance for his fallen comrades. It's enough to get a man PO'd, as the game states. From there, the game simply throws players into the fray with little to no explanation. You'll encounter a walking butt monster as the first enemy, and you'll need to dispatch them with a frying pan. The colors are gaudy, the sound mixing is a bit harsh, and the game is as violent as an FPS title could be in 1995. There's only one era that PO'd could have been made in, and you'll never mistake it for a modern game, even if its visuals were in 3D. In its original incarnation, it's not hard to imagine the movement in PO'd was a bit cumbersome. I've never played the original nor its PS1 port, but the game was developed before the advent of dual analog stick controllers. On a 3DO pad, you had to fumble about with buttons for shooting and changing weapons, with no dedicated buttons for aiming up or down or strafing. On PS1, dedicated strafing buttons were added, making movement a bit smoother. In this remaster though, PO'd feels fast as hell. I won't go as far as to say that the game controls beautifully, but Ox is a surprisingly maneuverable guy. Your jump is floaty and works with a consistent arc once in motion, but dodging monsters isn't a problem. What is kind of a problem is that your starting weapons are not only melee based, but don't have much impact. The frying pan has a sound effect that sounds straight out of a Nickelodeon cartoon, but otherwise feels kind of flat. Even with that said, the biggest issue you'll likely encounter during the first level is that PO'd doesn't make it readily apparent that the opening area is actually a hub. What you're supposed to do is go up one elevator and down another to jump into a portal for the first episode. I assume things worked like any other classic shooter and spent a solid 20 minutes exploring the level for an exit. Right off the bat, PO'd's teaching you that much of its game world is optional content. Once you understand this portal concept, which surprisingly beats Quake to the idea by 8 months, the levels in PO'd make more sense. This isn't a shooter where you're tasked with finding keys or navigating labyrinths, but almost one that was built for speedrunning. I'm not sure the community around speedrunning even existed back then, but a majority of the levels in PO'd can be completed in 20 seconds or less. Enemies are merely obstacles that prevent you from navigating smoothly rather than the main attraction. Now, that doesn't mean the enemy roster is lacking or anything. The best aspect of PO'd is how bizarre everything about it is. The enemies are not the typical type of aliens you would see in Duke Nukem 3D, nor even the hellish monsters like in Doom. In fact, I can't find many parallels to id Software's work here. All of the monsters are genuinely original and wacky, as if they were created by Andy Warhol on some gigantic bender. There are the aforementioned walking butts who fart clouds at you, reanimated meat teeth things, flying bats, what looks like a Valkyrie with rocket launchers, and some giant bald guy throwing rocks. I have no idea how any of these enemies fit together, but PO'd makes it work. To deal with the enemy threats, PO'd offers players a creative arsenal of weapons. They aren't all especially useful, and this is probably the overall weakest aspect of the experience, but I can't say I didn't enjoy getting a butcher's knife or piston drill to damage foes. The flamethrower is surprisingly useful, and your first hit scan weapon, a generic blaster, remains the most consistently dependable weapon in the entire campaign. Eventually, a pulse rifle outclasses everything, but it's hidden away until the final episode. Every other weapon feels superfluous. As an early 3D game, the environments in PO'd are mostly flat shaded with very basic geometry. This is more advanced than Doom, for instance, but a step behind something like Dark Forces. I think the readability of the stages is solid, and I do like the often garish colors, but I was a child of the 90s. There's something nostalgic here despite me having never played PO'd before. What is interesting is how large some of the maps can be, which is both impressive on a technical level and sort of pointless in execution. To deal with the size of these levels, PO'd not only lets you sprint like a maniac, but gives you a jetpack to fly around. The jetpack is the most unique thing here, as it does really open up your movement options. Interestingly, the difficulty you're playing on impacts the jetpack, with easy giving you infinite fuel and hard making it deplete much faster. I don't care for levels hiding the path forward behind one-sided textures, but I guess being able to fly around levels means you'll probably stumble upon holes in the walls by accident. I said it earlier, but a lot of the content in PO'd is entirely optional. That doesn't even refer to the secret levels, of which the first one is a truly awful example of early 3D design. No, most of the rooms and paths in this game serve no purpose beyond being something to explore. I can't fault developer AnyChannel for giving players expansive locales to trek through, but it seems that the quote I used during the intro of getting away from tunnel-based design may have been taken too religiously. Instead of providing big battlegrounds with a lot of unique encounters, PO'd is mostly just big. You won't realize that when you're traversing through certain levels for the first time, but once you understand how unnecessary these giant areas are, you'll tend to skip the bloat and go straight for finding the exit. Again, this is all impressive on a technical level, and likely blew the minds of the 10 or so 3DO owners back in 1995, but it doesn't result in interesting levels to exist in. It mostly makes me pine for the tunnel-based designs of Doom. The best levels in PO'd are exactly that, too. Without the included 3D map, I have no idea how I would have realized where I even need to be. Special mention goes to the level Lattice, which can go straight in the trash can. Somehow, though, I enjoyed my time with PO'd. I sort of hated it when I was playing the first couple of levels, but the sheer attitude and confidence that AnyChannel had in creating this experience exudes through. There's a certain charm to these weird enemies, ugly environments, and steadfast refusal to adhere to traditional FPS design that makes PO'd kind of fun. It reminds me that the infancy of the FPS genre had developers trying more zany things that you simply will not see happening in 2024. Maybe PO'd isn't good, but I understand the cult appeal it holds. Getting into Nightdive's remaster, the most obvious change PO'd has received is an increase in resolution. Being able to play this game in 4K does a lot to mitigate the effects of motion sickness some might have. Nightdive has provided options to remove head bobbing and look springing, of which I turned off both. You can even turn off the awful swaying that flying with the jetpack had in the original. There's full controller and keyboard remapping, though PO'd doesn't have many commands to fiddle with. I do like that you can insta-swap weapons by hitting their corresponding numbers, or even bring up a Half-Life styled menu to select the specific weapon you want without having to fumble with the mouse wheel. Audio quality has also been touched up, and while no new music was recorded for this remaster, the original game doesn't have a soundtrack at all, Nightdive has remained true to the original intention of this game. The biggest addition is a brand new difficulty option in Very Hard mode. I opted to stick with regular hard for my first playthrough, but PO'd handles its difficulty a bit differently than its contemporaries. Easy makes auto-aim practically 100% effective, gives you unlimited jetpack fuel, and reduces the speed of enemy projectiles. Their health is also cut down. Normal retains most of that, only adding jetpack fuel degradation and knocking your auto-aim down a bit. Hard has jetpack fuel expel faster, makes enemy projectiles move much faster, practically nullifies your auto-aim, ups enemy health, and even removes the ability to pause the game with the map screen. Very Hard, as you can assume, is just plain nonsense. PO'd Definitive Edition is a more conservative effort from Nightdive Studios, but the simple act of making the controls more palatable immensely helps here. If I had to play this game with a 7-button controller and at sub 30 FPS, I would probably hate PO'd. When things are running lightning fast and with razor sharp graphics, it's easier to acclimatize to what PO'd is. I still can't claim this is a good game, but Nightdive has managed to polish things to an extreme degree. Ultimately, PO'd Definitive Edition is yet another shining example of the work Nightdive does with its remasters. The original game is questionable with regards to how well it pulls off its own ideas, but the remaster makes it approachable for anyone curious. It's very reminiscent of the work Vinegar Syndrome does with cult classic films and vintage pornography. There is an incredibly small niche of filmgoers that are interested in such things, but Vinegar Syndrome remasters the films as if they were the most important movies ever created. For Nightdive, the company has treated PO'd as if it was an underrated treasure that everyone must play. I cannot and will not tell you that PO'd is something you need to experience. If you do want to try it though, this remaster is how you should play it. Maybe that makes this release more of a historical document, but I'll take that over the almost complete lack of preservation going on with major console manufacturers. Even bad games deserve to be remembered.